Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is our inaugural event in the new Punch It Up community of stand-ups, improvisers, and comedy writers. And we're talking about Punch Up and making scripts as funny as possible. And I'm so thrilled to have with us today Toronto's favorite Game of the Scene teacher, one of the guys who puts Toronto comedy on the map, and one of my favorite people, MATT FOLLIOTT. Hi. He's a stand-up, an improviser, a voice artist, an actor. You will, if you haven't seen him on stage or taken one of his classes, you've heard or seen him on TV in Clifford the Big Red Dog, Bigfoot, or Baroness von Sketch. Thank you so much for doing this, Matt.
Thank you. I'm so excited to do it.
Every time I look online or, because I took a Game of the Scene class in 2008. That was the last time, I mean, except for watching you teach, which I love the way you teach it. So I wanted to, but Game of the Scene has been around for like, what, 20 years now, would you say, 15 years?
Yeah, you know what, I would even say it's maybe even been around longer. From what I understand, it was around in Chicago, even in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah, like just maybe not as, maybe the tool wasn't as refined at that time, but people were talking about it, I believe, still in the 80s, even late 80s. So it's been around for a while. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Because I feel like as an audience, like since I learned about it, I started to see it proliferating everywhere, like in film and television. Okay, before we get into all that, I've seen so many different people try to explain Game of the Scene, but I just love your take on it. Can you summarize your perspective on it?
Yeah, I just always use a simple definition. It's a pattern of human behavior when heightened and explored creates comedy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you, and you also use adjective noun, right? Or is that only part of
For sure, yeah. Like I said, because it's a human behavior that's heightened and explored, it definitely can be chalked up to an adjective noun, something odd that describes a specific person. I shouldn't say just odd, something odd, unusual, funny, interesting that describes a specific person or people. Yeah.
For those, now we have a bunch of improvisers and stand-ups in the audience, but for people who have never ever seen improv, is there a way you could relay what Game of the Scene is to them?
Yeah, if you've never seen improv, I mean, essentially the best way to put it is any character you've ever seen in an improv scene that you like has a game. And we would call that a character game because they have something odd, interesting, unusual, or funny about them. I'm sure somebody has seen an improv show where somebody's played like an old weathered captain or sea captain. That's a game. I mean, I think we'd like to imagine everybody who goes out on sea is old, weathered, maybe crass, maybe rough around the edges, but that's just not true. That's maybe our imagination. I'm sure there's lots of people who are captains of boats who are very nice, normal people. And so we enjoy seeing that sort of exaggerated behavior of somebody who's really weathered, really crass, really sort of rough around the edges, being the captain of a ship. That example, of course, is a little more stereotypical because you will see that in a lot of film, a lot of TV, and it maybe not even so stereotypical, just more common. But that in itself is a game because that's just not the reality. There's lots of people down at Toronto Harbor who own boats, who are captains of ships, who are not old, who are not, they're not like weathered, they're not, again, crass, they're not rough around the edges, right? But we enjoy seeing those exaggerated behaviors in people, in people who have occupations that we know well. I always say we love incompetent, what I guess the best way to put it is we love incompetent people who in real life we consider very smart, essential, or are protectors. Like we love like incompetent firemen or a competent doctor because in real life we don't want those people to be incompetent. But on stage we want to see them fail, do their job badly, be reckless, screw things up because we get to laugh and go, that would never happen in real life. So adjective noun is a really great way of describing game because we get to see, again, people we might know or people we might idolize or people who have occupations we might idolize. We get to see them be sort of wonky, weird, unusual, strange, because we don't want to see that in real life.
I mean, that makes sense to me as a comedy writer. We're always looking for the core flaw, and we want flawed characters, and we want heightened reactions and exaggeration.
Yeah.
Okay, that totally makes sense to me. And it could be, incompetence could be like, I always go sexual, so horny nun, or like,
Oh yeah,
angry clown, like who's like not, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a great way of putting it. Is opposites are always fun. I mean, what would you least expect from a clown or a nun? Yeah, you probably least expect a nun to be horny, right? So that's going to create comedy. It's going to be fun to see, and I guarantee you that that's a concept that's used in a TV show or a movie. I'm sure we could find many movies where there's a horny nun. Very sound comedy premise, I'm sure. So yeah.
Oh my God. So do you have any tips for helping? Okay. So you teach improvisers and I teach comedy writers, but in both cases, we're trying to find the funny. So we're trying to find the game. Do you have any insights into like some ways into the game?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the best thing for a comedy writer to do is if you're writing something and you can sort of whittle your characters down to an adjective noun or a clear premise statement, then what you would want to do is essentially you would want to do almost what I would call like a joke sheet for that character. Yes. Meaning put that adjective noun at the top of a page or that character description at the top of a page. And then also write, if this is true, then what else is true? So if they are a horny nun, what else is true about them? And you can simply start generating ideas by asking yourself questions. Well, what would a horny nun have up in their room? Like posters on the wall or things on the wall. What kind of thing would a horny nun eat? What kind of thing does a horny nun read in terms of books? What do they watch on TV? Does a horny nun drive? What kind of car would they drive? Like, and if you just sort of take that statement and keep true to that statement of horny nun, and then just explore from there. Again, if that is true, then what else is true? What would a horny nun drive? What would a horny nun eat? What would a horny nun be looking for in a life mate? How does a horny nun pray at the feet of a statue of Jesus? I mean, you can just sort of brainstorm from there, and not everything you're going to get from that is going to be like an amazing joke, but some things you are going to brainstorm are going to be sort of perfect examples of how that thing you've written is a comedic engine and can create jokes by exploring or revving that engine.
That's so fantastic, because we do like list association for joke writing, but this is like the next level of that, incorporating the character. Oh, that's so great. I've never even thought to do that.
Yeah, you can totally do that with the character, and you can I mean, for sketches it's just that simple. For sketches, if the sketch is about just a horny nun, let's say like horny nun at brunch. I don't know why they're at brunch. You would just write that and go, well, if that's true, if a horny nun is at brunch, then if that is true, then what else is true, right? But you can just do that with characters, and you can also just do that generally with the premise of, for instance, a sketch, perhaps the premise of a show, but I know shows tend to have tentacles that kind of go in more than one place, whereas comedy tends to be good when there's one thing that you're exploring. Right? Yeah. So we just want to explore a horny nun at brunch. We don't want that to sort of tangent into a million other things. We want it to be specific.
For each character, like we have a whole, we have all this work we do on layering the character and everything, but the engine is the character. So if we can start with a grounded horny nun and keep her consistently that way across the series, and then there's games between characters too.
Of course, yeah. That's what we would call like a relationship game.
Right?
It's how my odd and interesting, unusual thing, how it sort of bounces off or plays with your odd, unusual, or interesting thing. So relationship dynamic or character dynamics that they have together, yeah.
Oh, great. And are there any other kind of, I know like there's word games, there's word play games, right? Within a
Yeah, I mean, the two games that I always sort of talk about, just that are sort of really what I would call every kind of specific pattern that can happen falls under these two types of game, which is character game and relationship game. And then you sort of get in improv, at least, and for writing in a way. Actually, no, I think for writing it would be very similar, or if not the same. you're going to have these sort of preset patterns that exist that allow you to express a game. So a good example would be like one-upmanship.
Right.
Anybody with an odd, interesting, unusual behavior, or I should say any two people that have odd, interesting, unusual behaviors can express their games by one-upping each other. A good example of that would be like in Bridesmaids, where I think they're singing a song.
We did that in class.
Yeah, where there's like singing a song and they keep grabbing the mic from each other and sort of one-upping each other with how they're singing.
Yeah.
That's just a way that those two characters are expressing their game right there. They're competitive with each other and they're finding a game in that scene by one-upping each other, right?
That whole movie is game of the movie. And I keep meaning to ask Paul, I am going to ask him one day if that was intentional, because, you know, the two women who wrote it were groundlings, and I would assume that they've studied game. But there's a game in the whole movie of who's the better friend, and within each scene there's games, and it is one-upmanship, a lot of it.
Right, and that is an amazing example, because once you know, like, it's who's the better friend, well, of course that's why they're one-upping each other in that scene, because they're trying to be the better friend at that moment. They're trying to show that they're the coolest, the best friend, right, by singing better. And so that is really cool that the whole movie has that sort of continuity with, let's see these games expressed through different patterns in the scenes. And that's really nice, yeah.
And then they heighten, of course, right? So
of course, yeah.
Game we have to heighten within the scene, and then we heighten across scenes, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. I mean, for heightening in a scene, in improv, I tend to think it's a little bit different. I think in improv, heightening really just means to intensify something. It just means to be more emotional. And exploring is where you get to express the game with different offers. So when you couple those things, you're expressing the game and you're finding new ways and new offers of expressing that game. And then you're also caring about it more, which makes it feel like it's heightening because you're getting more invested in it emotionally. Because I think we can't ignore in improv that it's a bit of acting and a bit of comedy. So you kind of want to blend the two. In writing, though, I don't think it has to be like that. I think writing can be more like the way UCB describes heightening and exploring, which heightening for UCB is just, if this is true, then what else is true? And exploring is, if this is true, then why is it true?
And in comedy writing, it's like how much more pain, you just keep amping up the pain that you put your comedic characters in.
Sure.
They just can't go any further, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that is I think before people were talking about game of the scene, game already existed. They just were talking about it in different ways. Oh. And I think that is directly connected to game, which is, can you make something worse or better for somebody, and how much can you push that? Right?
Right. Oh, great. And that's like, that's movie structure, it's scene structure, it's
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you put somebody through hell, you definitely get to see who they are. And that's what game of the scene is seeing who somebody is, seeing why they're odd, interesting, unusual, or funny. Yeah.
And I remember when I learned game, it was like the nicotine in the cigarette, right? So once you identify what the game is, you walk away from the game and then you come back with it harder. Do you also teach it that way?
Yeah, that's a very improv way of playing a game. And the interesting thing about that, without getting too heady about it, is that is what I would consider a preset pattern for playing game. Mm. Meaning that is always a pattern you can create in your scenes that help you express a game, because you take little breaks from it and then you surprise the audience again by bringing it back or exploring it more.
Oh, great.
An audience intuitively loves that, because what that essentially does what a stand-up does, which is you build tension and then you break tension with the joke. Build more tension, come back to it, break it with a joke.
Right, and it's like a callback with a surprise, but it's heightened. It's all of it.
That's it. I mean, and comedy is really just building and breaking tension. So if you can walk away from something that's funny and build the tension to getting back to it, it's going to be that much better when you hit it again.
Oh yeah, amazing. And people they feel smart because they can feel what the game is, and they
they know that they want that thing to come back intuitively, for sure, like the audience. Yeah.
The pleasure of it.
Yeah.
What drew you personally to teaching game? Because you're really known for it.
I've always just like, I've always wanted comedy to be like, I've always wanted my improv to be like comedic improv. I really do love like more sort of slower, grounded, maybe even story style improv or more realistic improv. I think improv, there's room for everything. But when I've stepped on a stage, I've always ultimately wanted what I'm doing to be funny and it to be a comedic style of improv. And so game of the scene really is that, or using game of the scene in your improv is really that. It's getting to the core of what's funny about your scene and then exploring that through improvisation. And I think that's so much fun. And I think like, you know, when you think of like going to a writer's room, if you're able to do that on stage so quickly, you're going to be able to do that in a writer's room. You're going to be able to just spit out a lot of jokes. Whether they're all funny or not is neither here nor there. It's the fact that you can generate a lot of material based on a comedic idea.
For sure. I mean, we all know jokes 10 to 1. You write 10 jokes to write one good one. And
That's it.
With improv. And but it's, I mean, writers' rooms are full of, I would say at least, you know, 30% of the room are improvisers, right? At least.
Absolutely, yeah.
They have to be able to, and then there's 30% who are stand-ups, and then there's like that's.
Yeah. I think also too the nature of improv is just it is an ensemble art form, so you learn to work with people very quickly and to build on each other's ideas. And if you all are speaking the same vocabulary with Game of the Scene, that's fantastic because you can build upon each other's jokes very easily.
Yeah, that's why I'm hoping that the people who are stand-ups or who don't come from any improv background, they can learn it and maybe even like take your class, because your class is such a quick vein into it. Then they can apply it in their writing because they're going to need to communicate with other writers who are improvisers.
Yeah, and you're right. It's good to have a sort of a base of the language so that you can talk about it. Yeah.
Because people don't, I mean, since I just noticed more and more, especially in the last 6 years, in movies, in TV series, in sitcom.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's either got to be conscious or unconscious, but it feels very conscious.
It is. I mean, it very much had its time in the spotlight. I still think it's a very widely used improv technique and comedic technique. I wonder if something else will replace it. Or become more popular. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely had its moment in the sun. I think almost to the point where you can watch some movies where there's too much of it. Like I would argue like watching Sacha Baron Cohen's The Dictator is actually a great example of why you shouldn't always do game of a scene in a movie. Because that movie has scenes where I'm like, this is terrible. Like the game is not worth how much how much you're kind of revving the gas on this game is not worth it. It just almost gets to a point where like, I'm not invested in this anymore. This is kind of blah, you know? Whereas I think in a movie like Bridesmaid, it's a little more balanced. Although there is game in every scene, you're really also rooting for all those characters. It's not one dimensional, which is what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Well, Paul and Judd have a specific way of working in all their movies and shows that they started in Freaks and Geeks, where they're very much, and it's funny because it's the same way I was intuitively teaching comedy writing. And then when I met Paul, I didn't realize that was his whole thing. Him and Judd, they don't try to be funny. The funny is last, right? So the game would be added very late in the process. They start with the core of the character. They build the story, make sure they have a story that works. And then they get to punch up and game and everything.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I would agree with that too. I think in sketch writing, it's different. But yeah, when you're writing a script, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a movie, make us like the people first before you just make them do jokes. Because I think that's the perfect example of what's wrong with the movie The Dictator. You don't really care about any of the characters or any of the relationships, and so therefore the games are really one-dimensional and not as funny.
Yeah. I haven't seen the movie. I've just seen clips of it. So
yeah, it's not worth it, but maybe see it if you want to see it done badly. At least that's my opinion. And sorry if anybody is connected to that movie in any way, but I just think it's a good example of how you can take this concept even too far, essentially.
It's great when Sasha is like the race car driver in Legend of Ricky Bobby.
So funny.
The gay race car driver. Oh my God, so funny. Yeah.
So great. Yeah.
And he's not the lead in that, so maybe that sort of helps, but or just it's just maybe just a question of how.
And honestly, I think with just that movie, it's just probably They just probably, the writers maybe just got carried away with it and didn't do the other things they needed to do. Because
Right.
yeah, you've seen so many comedy movies like a Talladega Nights. I still really like all those characters. Like
Yeah.
it's not one dimensional to me, that film. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Adam McKay, I think he's a comedy
Adam McKay's great.
Yeah. And one of my favorite comedy editors, Brent White, cut that. I mean, he really will find the funny. Like there's funny, there's all kinds of funny, but he will whittle it down till there's balance. He's
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I think that's important for writing. Yeah, balance is key.
And we, of course, on set, we way overshoot. There's 10 jokes that are written for one that works, but on set, there's maybe 10 punch-ups and 10 different takes, and then it's really crafted in the cut.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Do you think, so you don't, I was going to ask you if there have been any major new developments in improv since Game, but really there hasn't been, right?
Well, no, there's always new developments, but I don't know if there's been anything that has caught on like a wildfire like Game has. Okay. But I mean, even myself, I mean, you're not pushing forward with improv if you aren't creating new exercises and new ways of exploring the art. So I'm always trying to create new exercises. I'm always trying to frame things in different ways, or express maybe a tool I already know in a different way or a new way. So I'm always constantly trying to do that, and other improv teachers, instructors, coaches are always doing that. But yeah, I don't know if there's any big concept like Game that has really sort of taken over in the last couple of years. I still think Game is going pretty strong as a concept that people are interested in exploring and learning and using. So, and it's pretty dominating in writing right now, like you said. So it's moved into the TV world, which I think reinforces why it's so important right now in the live comedy world. Because let's be honest, in Canada, not everybody wants to do live comedy for the rest of their life. There's not as much money in it. So.
Also in the States, even though there is more money there's still much more of a living you can make doing TV, and you have more reach, right? You have more reach.
That's it. And yeah, I mean, I think everybody eventually gets to the point where they're like, I want something a little more permanent. I might want to show something to my family later on, you know? So.
Oh my God. I was going to say,
are we getting too existential now?
No, it's funny. We're both, I was like, I think I went to improv, like level A through D, I think we were in at Second City.
Oh, we were, yeah, we definitely were.
But I was so much older than everyone, so I always think like I just assume I'm way older than you, but I don't know. I keep saying.
I don't think that's true. No, I maybe look young. I'm getting up there.
Young. We're both wearing our hats. Well,
that's it.
My gray, right? So.
Yeah. Mine is because I don't have too much up here. That's how much older I'm getting. So looks real good here, not so good here. Yeah.
It's the height of summer, guys. We're like sweating. So in your classes, do you have levels, or do you train absolute beginners? I'm asking maybe like if writers want to take your classes and they've never improvised, is that something they'd be able to do?
Yeah, it's totally fine. I tend to say I do like a level, sort of like the equivalent of like a level A to E at Second City, meaning essentially I like when people have done at least a year of improv before getting into Game, because it's good to have some of the fundamentals, like knowing how to set up a platform, meaning know how to offer a who, a what, and a where to your scene, so you get some context off the top. That's very important when you're improvising in order to find Game. It's a lot better to know who you are and where you are. Then you can find out what's odd, interesting, unusual about yourself. So I do like a little bit of that base, but not necessarily. With Game itself, I can typically teach somebody how to improvise from the ground up, because it is that much of an all-encompassing tool in a way. It in itself is a complete approach to doing improv, which is a very interesting thing in itself, because the way I sort of learned it, I incorporated into a bigger tool belt I had, but the way other people learn it, they just learn it as the be-all to improv, which is very interesting.
But I can see how that's dangerous in terms of really, getting yourself out of a jam, layering things. And in fact, as writers, if writers are going to improvise, I think they should start from the ground up, because we have to build characters well and
I would agree too. I think especially in every facet of the entertainment world, you should have as much experience as possible. you should sort of be able to cook with all the ingredients if you have to. Because yeah, I mean, as a writer, you might get on a show and you might not need to have game of the scene as much. It's good that you have it. It's good that you can do it, but there might be other things that you need, you know?
Yes, yes. Oh, that's great. We're going to open it up to the floor in a sec, but
Sure.
I want to let people know how they can reach you if they want to take your classes.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. The best thing to do is just follow me on Twitter at MATT FOLLIOTT or on Instagram at MATT FOLLIOTT. Because of COVID, I don't have any classes happening right now, but as soon as we're able to get back into a classroom, I will definitely have classes. I haven't been teaching online just because for me personally, I just feel like I would rather do it in person.
Oh yeah.
I really would. I think improv is one of those things where we should, especially when you are learning something from the ground up, we should be in the same room and able to do it. But as soon as that can happen, I will be back out there with the You Got Game classes that I teach, and I usually teach them at Comedy Bar. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Comedy Bar. We have people from all over North America, but Comedy Bar is our sacred comedy space in Toronto, the indie scene. It's such a great, wonderful space.
It's great. Yeah.
Let's see. I haven't looked in on the comments. Let's see if any. So,
Sure.
There's a 20-second delay as well. So they haven't seen me ask. Someone said, hello. Does anybody have questions for Matt on Game of the Scene or on his career or on what he teaches?
Oh yeah, and I love the career thing. I would love to talk about my career. I'm so full of myself. So please, if you have any career questions, I'd love that.
There's people.
Whatever you want to ask me, I'm an open book. Yeah.
I always love asking people if you had that great comedy moment on stage, you know, was that the moment that you knew you wanted to do Game of the Scene or the moment that Game of the Scene saved you? Do you have any of that?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I've just been lucky to have so many fun scenes, but there are some scenes that stand out where game was part of that scene and made it really, really fun. I remember doing one scene with one of my scene partners who I play with often, Cameron Algie. We're in a group called S&P. And I remember he had basically, he was a teacher who had come back from military duty. And he said, you know, it's all great. I'm excited to be this teacher at the school, but just please don't mention anything about war. It makes me a little shaky. And then, of course, I just went, okay, well, there's the button. We now know the button to press, right? There's the game. You're going to freak out if we talk about war, right? So, of course, I just found many subtle ways of mentioning war while I interviewed him to be the teacher. And I always love that because that to me is just a very simple type of game to play that you can also do in your writing, and that's called frustrating the want. If your character has a want, make it harder for them to get it, and poke and prod them with that want. Almost like almost giving somebody a grape but taking it away, right? Almost giving somebody what they need but taking it away. And that's a really fun thing to do. And that sort of goes back to what you were saying, which is make it difficult for your characters, make them struggle through something, right? And you can definitely do that with a frustrating the want. It's super fun to see a character try and get what they want, and it can become a game, and that's very fun.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. I see questions coming in.
Sure.
Jason DeLine would like to know, can you talk about resolving a game?
Sure, yeah. So what you want to do when resolving a game is you always want to leave that, of course, for the end of your scene. Because if you resolve a game too early, it just essentially means you take that game away, right? And so this is something that is often very challenging for improvisers when they start learning game, because when improvisers tend to learn game, when improvisers are improvising, we get really trapped in our story brain on stage, which always makes us want to solve problems very quickly. Meaning we want to give that person the thing they want because then the problem is solved. So you really have to fight that resolution that you want to give that person. And what you want to do is, again, you want to poke, if we're using frustrating the want specifically, again, you want to frustrate them, poke and prod them with what they want and never give them what they want. Only at the end can you give them what they want, when you want the thing to be done, when you want the behavior that you are exploring to be done. So leave your resolutions for the end. If you wrap it up too early, that game goes by. It goes bye-bye. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so extract the maximum laughs.
And that's it. Yeah. Milk that game as much as you can and then resolve it at the end. Now, you should know though, that even if you resolve something, you can't always bring that game back. Nothing is truly resolved unless you really want it to be resolved.
Huh. Well, like you can bring it back in a different scene in the future?
You can bring it back in a different scene, or you can also just plainly pretend that it's resolved and then it's not resolved. Right? This is the thing. If I resolve, for instance, if it is you want a grape and I finally give you a grape, right? It doesn't mean that you then don't have that interaction 2 seconds later with somebody else who won't give you a grape. So you can always bring it back, or somebody who doesn't give you something else that you want. Right? So you can always bring it back even though you've resolved it. But I tend to think it's much better in terms of beginning, middle, and end to have it clearly set the parameters. This person wants something, frustrate the hell out of what they want, and then at the end give them what they want. Just so you have that clear beginning, middle, and end. Yeah.
Do you, and you have multiple games going on in scenes too sometimes, right?
You can, but it can get quite complicated. In improv, I would say only have one going on. In your writing, you definitely could, though, have multiple games going on. And I think you very much see that in sitcoms that tend to just be, not really about a lot. And it just tends to be like, well, okay, this happened, and now how do all these characters sort of feel or deal with that thing? And that's where you can really have each character playing their game in regards to how they're dealing with something. Like, I mean, I don't know if this ever happened in Friends, but say who was dating? Say like Ross was dating Rachel and they broke up. You can then see how Phoebe, how Joey, how Monica would react to that, and their reactions are going to be their games. Right? It's going to be through the lens of dopey actor, right? If you're Joey, right? Yeah. So you can definitely do that. You can definitely have more than one going on.
And they had that verbal, we were on a break, that they would bring in, every time.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's no other questions about game, you guys?
They've learned it all. They know it all.
They're experts. It's one of those things, and I think Jason has actually done Game of the Scene, and if Daniel's here, he's done it. It's one of those things that you have to try in your body to know.
It's not something that I feel like comes super easily. It doesn't. You need time with it. You need time with the concept. But I think what's great for writing, it's just do some of the things we discussed. It's like put some adjective nouns at the top of a page and basically do, if this is true, then what else is true on those adjectives, those adjective nouns. Or put full premises. Put at the top of your page, man goes on date with a donkey. And then do, if that is true, then what else is true? What would you order for a donkey if they were on a date? What kind of wine would a donkey want to have? Or do they have wine at all? Do they have something else? Do they just have a trough full of water? I don't know.
It's interesting. Adam McKay and Will Ferrell said they play this. So, because we play this, it's a game, but it's not a game. It's like an approach. What I always say, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then you write the scene from that perspective. Yeah. But Adam and Will say, what's the weirdest thing that can happen? And then you get the jazz flute scene, right?
Yeah. And jazz flute. What a great premise and game, right? Imagine if that is true, then what else is true? Imagine if somebody did jazz flute. Very, very silly. Yeah.
If someone's name was Ron Burgundy and they were on a date, what would they? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's it. And that's exactly it. That's where that game comes from, right? What would Ron Burgundy do to impress a date? Well, he plays jazz flute, right?
With flames coming out the side.
Super silly. Yeah.
Sarah Bransfield asks, can you talk about explaining the game of the scene on paper when writing sketches or scripts?
So can you just repeat that again for me?
Can you talk about translating or explaining game of the scene on paper when writing sketches or scripts?
Sure. So I guess meaning so other people. So I'm not sure I understand that question. I'm so sorry.
Me too. I think she means if you're writing a scene and you're doing game, so you're not improvising game. And Sarah, tell me if I'm wrong in my interpretation of your question. But how do we identify the game and then apply it?
Yeah. Okay. For writing, it's basically going to have to come from your character or from the premise of that scene entirely. With writing, I highly doubt you're going to find a game organically, although it can happen. But I think what is better is to set out going, Like you said, what would Ron Burgundy do if he went on a date? Sure, you know that that's the next scene you have to write. Great. What would he do? Find out what that is beforehand. Sure, he'd play jazz flute, then write all the jokes. Okay, so he's now on a date playing jazz flute. If that is true, then what else is true? You're going to have to know the premise in order to get the what if this is true, what else is true sort of momentum going in your writing. You're going to have to know that premise. Again, I have written things where I have organically found the games, which is really fun, but I really think it is much better to know your characters and sort of know their games going into the specific scene you've set up for them. Again, it can happen and you can find more just writing. And I think if you do, embrace that and play those games, play those patterns.
Well, I mean, actually, Sarah was in the TV writing class, and the TV writing students, we all have the, we know the want, need, flaw for each character, and then they know each scene has a specific want. So they do that. I guess, and I'll give you an example in Punch Up. I had a student have a game of the scene that wasn't working. So we found a new game that was more, we zeroed in on the character, and then we figured out a game that was more in line with those characters, and it started to work better. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and that may be something you need to do with writing too, because we're always editing when we write, right? So if you write something and you're like, okay, that's a fun game, but other people are like, there's probably a stronger one. Just go back to their behavior and go, how can I explore their behavior with a different game in this scene? Yeah.
Did that answer it, Sarah? Great. She said great. Thank you. Okay,
oh, great. Cool.
Elizabeth Bates, how do you know when a game has gone on too long, especially if you're writing and not in front of an audience?
Yeah. I think you can always go with the good old rules of 3 in comedy, and I think that's not a bad way to look at it. If you've hit that pattern, that game 3 times, it might be time to either resolve it, end the scene, or move on to another game.
Right. Yeah. And you know what, if you're shooting it, if it's something that's going to be shot, you can try more than 3, and then the editor will probably cut it down to 3. Okay. And you'll have an audience on set, you'll have the crew. That's how some directors gauge it. But then you'll have an audience because you have a test audience. Yeah.
But yeah, that is an interesting question, because that is also can be a matter of taste.
Right.
I mean, some scenes you can really just keep pushing the game. You can just escalate it to crazy heights. It's just really a matter of preference, right? And matter of what your scene actually needs. Obviously, in a sketch, where a sketch, I mean, is not like in a TV show where, the scene in a TV show, you should want to watch that scene because it's going to make you want to watch the next scene and the next scene, right? In a sketch, it's not like that. So you can just go to the moon in a sketch if it's the right thing, meaning you can crank the absurdity. But depending on what you're writing, you might not want to do that in every scene in your sitcom or your half-an-hour TV show, right? Because you're going to want to tell probably a more complex story than just the actual comedy of that scene.
Yeah, and of course, we still have to structure it so that the biggest laugh is on, the last line should be the biggest laugh still, but sometimes it's the most emotional moment. And usually it's both, but sometimes it's not.
Right, and that's why I'd say go with that 3. If you can hit that game at the start of your scene, plug it in again at the middle of your scene, and then, like you said, end on the biggest game laugh you can get at the end. That's a good way of structuring that scene. Again, unless you're writing sketch comedy, which is like, then you can write stuff like you've seen in Key and Peele, where you have that football sketch where it's just the game is that all the players have the most long, unusual names you've ever heard, and you can just play that game forever as long as you're getting laughs. As long as those names get they get longer, more absurd, more complicated, more silly, then you can play that game till the cows come home, because it's not the catalyst for the next scene. It's not making you want to watch the next scene, right? It's just a standalone thing.
Right, and then once you know the game, it's just laugh. Like it's just, yeah.
But again, very different from the sketch writing, obviously, and sitcom writing or TV show writing, movie writing. They are different. They have different needs you have to fulfill.
Cool. Jason Deline asks, what are other ways to put game in a scene for TV series that isn't the worst thing that can happen or the weirdest thing that can happen to a character? What are other ways to heighten?
Sure, yeah. So a good thing to know too is game can be odd interesting, unusual, or funny. So an interesting thing can be a game. Something that doesn't necessarily tickle you as much at the beginning can get to a place where it's tickling you later on if it starts from somewhere interesting. So you can always do that. It doesn't necessarily need to be the most wacky, bizarre thing ever. It can just be something interesting. And then you can get it to a place of more absurdity. In terms of heightening in your scenes, what I would say is, again, like I said about the UCB thing, try to think of, I think when you're writing, this is probably a better approach than the improv way I discussed, which is think of heightening as, if this is true, then what else is true? And think of exploration of why this is true. Because I think when you think of why this is true, you're going to get to some moments in your script where the character has to explain why they're like that and go a little bit more into the heart of why they're a certain way. And I think that heart, obviously coupled with the comedy, is going to create really nice scenes for you when you're writing. Meaning, some explanations of why people act like that, or why it's important people are acting like that, I think is probably a better approach for writing TV, writing movies.
I love that, because it's like, even with our horny nun, why is she a horny nun? She's got daddy issues, and her daddy is God, like the biggest daddy of all. So like, you can go so deep into that. That's
the thing. And I think that too creates stakes, meaning that person is going to care more. We're going to care more when we know why things are happening, right? And I think that's a nice way of heightening. Whereas in improv, sure, I want to care when I'm watching the show, but mostly I actually just want the improvisers to care. I want them to be the ones who are committed and being emotional and driving the scene forward. I don't need to know so much of the backstory when I'm watching an improv scene, because I'm probably not going to see these characters too much, right? I'm going to see one scene with them. But in a movie you're writing, or in a script you're writing, it is good to get to that why people act like that, even if it's just a little bit every scene. Seeing a little bit behind the curtain of their behavior, I think can get to that place where we're heightening, exploring in a more productive way when we're writing. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Jason says, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, great.
I don't see any more questions. Let me see, I must have some for you, but let's see. I wonder if the stand-ups have any question about game, because we don't incorporate game in stand-up. We use things, we use you're a stand-up too, so
actually, I like that you said I was. I've done it maybe I've done it maybe 15 times. So I have dabbled in it, but I'm definitely not a professional stand-up, nor even really an amateur stand-up. Just somebody who has dabbled in it a few times. Yeah.
You had a particular style that the times I've seen you on stage, you've had a
Sure. I was very lucky when I did some stand-up. I'd been doing improv for probably 8 or 9 years at that point. So I was always very fine with going up and trying stuff, and I did enjoy myself. But you're right. This technique isn't used as much in stand-up. Yet in many ways it still has a lot to do with the way you write a joke. Because like I said, a lot of the way people play game is still building tension, breaking tension by playing the game. Building tension, breaking tension by playing the game. So essentially, often game is really fun to watch when you see the same sort of technique being used, which is build the tension, or build the joke and then release the joke at the end, right? And that's kind of fun. That's a fun way to think of game. Is in the same way as setup and punchline.
And I always remember in learning game, we have to take note of how we know that we've hit the game is when the audience laughs, right? So
it's a big way of letting you know, yeah.
So even as stand-ups, how we know, sometimes we're just talking, we're just talking shit at the mic, and then the audience suddenly laughs, and we have to take note of why they laugh so that we can get them there again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in an improvised moment when you're doing stand-up should register why somebody has laughed at something.
Yeah.
Because there is behavior there that they're laughing at. And if you can continue to explore that behavior, whatever it may be, or that premise, then you're going to play the game of that idea, right? And that's going to be super fun to see. And I think sometimes you do see like somebody like I'm just trying to think of like a stand-up that sort of does it in character, like
Oh yeah.
like an what's his name? What's the guy with the leather jacket? The fucking
And
Andrew. What's his name?
Andrew
Andrew
Dice.
Dice Clay, right? Andrew Dice Clay is essentially playing, I think, similar to himself, but a character, and that character has a game. He's rude. He's rude,
Right.
and he's crass, and he's a misogynist, and it's sort of like that comic from LA. He's escaping me right now, but he plays the terrible comic. He plays the worst comic in the world.
Oh, not emo. Emo's amazing.
No, but emo is another one who has a bit of a character
Yeah.
going, and that allows him to play some games as that character, to do some jokes that are related to sort of the overall behavior that he's bringing out on stage. That's why I think stand-ups can attest to this. It's good to know your voice in stand-up, or eventually know your voice, because your voice is going to be your behavior, or the way you see the world, your point of view. I want to make that clear too. Point of view and behavior are essentially the same things. If you have a very clear point of view, it means you have a very clear way of interacting with the world, meaning you have a very clear behavior. Okay?
Great.
So they are the same thing. So when stand-ups have a clear point of view, their jokes are essentially them playing the game of their point of view.
Oh, you know who's a great example is Maria Bamford, because she'll go off
Yes.
into voices.
Absolutely. That is a very good. And another one that comes to mind is like Chris Rock. Chris Rock very much has a very like, I'm a dad and I'm sort of into spirituality right now. And a lot of his jokes are about that. They're playing the game of his behavior, which
And you
is
said
those.
Toronto comic Chris Rock, not
Chris Rock. Yeah, no, not Chris Rock. Chris Rock. I think he's very good at doing that. And that's the thing. I think having a voice does that for stand-ups as well. It helps them play the game of that voice. It helps them express their behavior through jokes.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jason said callbacks are games too. Yes, but what you're calling back is what the game is, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, callbacks can be games, because a very simple way of looking at game too is anything that happens twice is a game, because anything that happens twice is a pattern, and patterns are games. It's a very important thing to understand that games are just rules and patterns that are fun to play.
Great.
That's all they are. Because a comedic game is the exact same thing as baseball or any sport, because sports have rules and patterns, and so do comedic games. Right? And that's the thing. As long as you're creating rules and patterns, you're creating a game. So yes, if you bring something back more than once, it does sort of have that. It is a pattern, and it can be considered a game, but not necessarily. Sometimes callbacks are just what I like to describe as a callback often is just connecting a new idea with an old idea. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a game. It can just be something you're calling back that was funny once, and now you're calling it back again and connecting it to a new idea. That's it. But like I said, anything that does happen more than twice could be considered a game, because patterns and rules make games, or are games. And I also want to be even more to not blow your mind, but to make it even more convoluted for you. Patterns and rules are the exact same thing. When I say patterns and rules, I'm just saying the same thing. It's redundant. Rules are patterns, patterns are rules.
But we're creating them based on familiar
behaviors. Yeah.
Ooh, there was a weird echo in there. That was trippy. Wow, thank you so much. I don't see any more questions. We'll give people a couple more minutes. I just want to because I love how in depth we were able to get in this time.
I think I do have one thing to say to your writers, because I like to tell this to anybody who's doing Game of the Scene. Another thing too is don't judge the way you play your games. Meaning whatever information comes out through your exploration of this is true, then what else is true, is the right approach. There is no wrong way to play a game. There really isn't. Once you know what it is, just express it and explore it the way you want to. By going, if this is true, then what else is true? There's no wrong way to play a game. Once you know the rules and patterns to your game, there's no wrong way of playing it. That would be like saying, once you know baseball, there's a wrong way of playing baseball. There isn't. You might not be good at baseball, but there's not a wrong way of playing baseball. And in fact, we know this to be true because Jose Bautista plays baseball differently than Babe Ruth, but yet they're playing the same game. they're playing baseball, right?
Well, yeah, yeah.
So we're all going to have a different approach to these games that we come up with. Just know that your approach is totally fine. And just because somebody else's is a little different doesn't make one better than the other. It's just your way of playing a game. I could tell you, hey, you know, write a joke sheet on man goes on a date with a donkey. You're going to have totally different jokes than I am. You're going to play the game totally different than I do. But guess what? We still played the same game. We just played it a bit differently. That's all.
That's wonderful. That's such a great way to wrap it up. Yeah, because it's like when sometimes you get a laugh and you're like, I don't really know why that was funny. And the sort of weirdness of it is what brings you back to the game. But there's many jokes and many scenes like that where like, it just works and we don't know why it works, but it works. And we just keep trying to do whatever we did that got it to work.
Yeah, that's the thing. Don't judge yourself when you're going into this stuff. Like once you know what is the comedic engine of your scene, have fun just exploring that comedic engine and not judging yourself with what you come up with. Because you're going to come up with gold and somebody else is going to come up with different gold. And that's okay.
Yeah. I love that everyone's brains are so different. It's always blows. That's why I love teaching. I'm sure that's also why you love teaching. You see every performer.
Well, yeah, you definitely get to see things that you wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And that's fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
I hope I get to see you when it's not end times anymore, but
yeah, right.
But I thank you so much. If it is end times, by the way, for a while longer, and you want to do a course for writers, let's say, on game, I know it's not the same as getting it in your body, but think about it, because it's been fun being able to teach people.
Well, maybe I will have to talk to you, because that does interest me. And let's be honest, I think writing does translate over Zoom classes. I think that is something you're able to do over Zoom. So maybe we should talk. Look at that. We might have made a business connection here.
I'm doing this whole experimental thing with my punch-up class where just all summer I'm doing free stuff like punch-up gym and joke writing gym. And you're totally welcome to join us, by the way, if you're bored. But I know you're totally like it's like you're an athlete of Game of the Scene. I always tell people first you get good and then you get fast, and you must be so fast.
And I mean, I mean, I've stewed around in these ideas for a very long time now. So that's also the advantage I have, is I've just been in contact with this way of thinking for a long time.
Yeah.
But I still, even myself, sometimes miss things. And that's kind of the beauty of this, is you're always striving for perfection, and you probably will never get there, but that's okay.
And that's why punch-up is done often in groups, is everyone's got a different
absolutely. I think that's so beneficial in a writing room, obviously. Like you said, let the best joke sort of win.
Yeah. Love you, Matt. I really do.
Too.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.